The Freemason life of Carl Switzer, better known as Alfalfa. You all know Alfalfa from the Little Rascals, but did you know this child star was murdered? And do you know for what silly reason? Stay tuned to this episode of the old-fashioned Masonic Podcast and we'll tell you exactly what happened. Carl Dean Switzer, born August 8, 1927, was best known as an American singer, child actor, dog breeder, and guide. He was best known for his role as Alfalfa in the short subject series, Our Gang. Switzer began his career as a child actor in the 1930s, appearing in the Our Gang short subject series as Alfalfa. You may know that show as the Little Rascals. After leaving the Little Rascals in 1940, Switzer struggled to find substantial roles owing to typecasting. Can you imagine the twerp that played Alfalfa trying to run game on Marilyn Monroe? That would be a crash and burn. As an adult, he appeared mainly in bit parts and B-movies. He later became a dog breeder and hunting guide. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this strange story. Switzer was born in Paris, Illinois, the youngest of four. He and his brother Harold became famous in their hometown for their musical talent and performances. In 1934, the Switzers traveled to California to visit family. While there, an impromptu performance happened in front of producer Hal Roach. He was impressed. He signed both brothers to appear in Our Gang. Harold was given two nicknames, Slim and Deadpan, while Carl was dubbed Alfalfa. The brothers first appeared in the 1935 Our Gang short Beginner's Luck. By the end of the year, Alfalfa was one of the main characters, while Harold had been relegated to the background. Although Carl was an experienced singer and musician, his character Alfalfa was often called upon to sing off-key renditions of popular songs for comic effect, most often those of Bing Crosby. Alfalfa also sported a cowlick, which essentially is what set that character apart to the world. By the end of 1937, Switzer's Alfalfa had surpassed the series' nominal star, George Spanky McFarland, in popularity. While the boys got along, their fathers argued constantly over their sons' screen time and salaries. Imagine that, dudes and egos. Switzer's tenure on Our Gang ended in 1940 when he was 12. Due to his typecasting, Switzer appeared in a handful of roles over next 8 years, until he was 20 years old. He did bring back his Alfalfa character, complete with comically sour vocals, in PRC's Gas House Kids comedies in 1946 and 1947. By this time, Switzer was downplaying his earlier Our Gang work. In his 1946 resume, he referred to the films generically as MGM short product. He was trying to distance himself from that role. Switzer had small parts with actors such as Donna Reed, Bing Crosby, and fellow Freemason Danny Kaye. In the 1950s, Switzer returned to television. Between 1952 and 1955, he made 6 appearances on The Roy Rogers Show. Roy Rogers was also a Freemason. However, the roles being offered to Switzer started to dwindle even further. In addition to acting, Switzer bred and trained hunting dogs and guided hunting expeditions. This will become a key point to this story and the reason behind his death. So stay with us. Among his notable clients were Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, James Stewart, and even Henry Fonda. In early 1954, Switzer went on a blind date with Diantha Collingwood, also known as Diana. She was an heiress to the grain elevator empire Collingwood Grain. Switzer and Collingwood got along well and married in Las Vegas 3 months later. Shortly after being married, with his money running out and Diana pregnant, his mother-in-law offered them a farm near Pretty Prairie, Kansas. Their son, Justin Lance Collingwood Switzer, was born that year. After they divorced in 1957, Diantha married Richard Ross Eldridge, who adopted and raised Lance as his own, even changing his last name. This hurt Switzer and put him in a bit of a tailspin. On January 26, 1958, Switzer was getting into his car in front of a bar in Studio City when a bullet smashed through the window and struck him in the upper right arm. However, the gunman was never caught. No motive to the shooting was determined either. Switzer suspected that the new baby daddy was behind it. Later that December, Switzer was arrested in Sequoia National Forest for cutting down 15 pine trees that he had intended to illegally sell as Christmas trees. Now picture this, Alfalfa on a street corner selling Christmas trees. What a pitiful sight that would be. He was sentenced to 1 year's probation. He was also ordered to pay $225, which is $2,500 today. This was just a start of the unfortunate things to come to Switzer. Several days later, Switzer agreed to train a hunting dog for Bud Stilts. Stilts was a longtime friend and sometime business partner whom Switzer had met while working with Roy Rogers on various productions. While in Switzer's possession, The dog ran off to chase after a bear. Stilts was unsympathetic towards Switzer, firm in his demands that the former child star must either return his dog or pay him the equivalent of the dog's value. Unable to produce cash to settle the debt, Switzer took out ads in newspapers and put up flyers offering a reward for the safe return of the animal. Eventually, the dog was located and brought to the bar where Switzer was working at the time. The rescuer was rewarded with $35 in cash and $15s in alcoholic beverages, the equivalent of about $500 today. The loss of his $50 did not sit well with Switzer. During an emotional conversation with his friend, Switzer and his friend decided that Stilts should reimburse Switzer the finder's fee. Their argument was that the dog was Stilts's and not Switzer's. Sounds like someone had some liquid courage in them. Switzer and his friend arrived at Stilts's home in Mission Hills. Switzer and Pyatt intended to demand money from Stilts. Though differing accounts of the event exist, all agree that Stilts was struck over the left side of his head with a glass clock. He later retreated to his room to retrieve a .38 caliber revolver, which Switzer wrestled him for. Their struggle caused the gun to discharge. Stilts has testified that Switzer had banged on his front door, yelling, "Let me in or I'll kick in the door!" The threat was followed by a struggle that began with one of the men, Switzer or Pyatt, striking him with the clock. This prompted Stilts to retrieve his firearm, which Switzer grabbed for. The gun discharged accidentally, shooting Switzer. Switzer was shot in the groin, damaging an artery that caused massive internal bleeding. Switzer was pronounced dead on arrival at 7:27 p.m. at Valley Receiving Hospital at the age of 31. There, however, were differing accounts of this story. The shooting was judged to be self-defense. During the inquest regarding Switzer's death, it was revealed that what was reported as a hunting knife was in fact a penknife. It had been found by crime scene investigators under his body. Over 42 years later, in January 2001, Tom Corrigan told reporters, "It was more like murder." He said he heard the knock on the front door, and Switzer said, "Western Union for Bud Stilts." Corrigan's mother, Rita Corrigan, opened the door to find a drunk Switzer complaining about a perceived month-old debt and demanding repayment. Corrigan said Switzer entered the house first, followed by Jack Pyatt. Switzer said he was going to beat up Stilts, and Stilts confronted Switzer with a .38 caliber revolver in his hand. Corrigan said that Switzer grabbed the revolver and Stilts and Switzer struggled over it. He said Pyatt broke a glass-domed clock over Stilts's head, causing Stilts's eye to swell shut. Corrigan said he had just stepped out the front door. He said he then turned and saw Switzer sliding down the wall with a surprised look on his face after Stilts had shot him. Corrigan said he saw a closed penknife at Switzer's side, which he presumed fell out of his pocket or his hand. He said he then saw his stepfather shove Pyatt against the kitchen counter and threatened to kill him too. Corrigan said they heard emergency sirens as Pyatt begged for his life, and that he thought this was the only reason Stilts did not kill Pyatt. Corrigan said his stepfather lied in his account of the event before the coroner's jury. Corrigan said a Los Angeles Police Department detective interviewed him and asked if he would testify before the judge. Corrigan said he agreed to, but he was never called before the court. Moses Stilts died in 1983 at the age of 62 before the case could be reopened. In January 1959, Carl Switzer was interred at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Hollywood, California. Because he died the same day as Freemason Cecil B. DeMille, his death received only minor notice in most newspapers, as DeMille's obituary dominated the columns. Switzer had appeared as a slave, uncredited in the last film for which DeMille was credited as a director, The Ten Commandments. Switzer's grave marker displays two square and compasses emblems. He is widely reported to have been encouraged to join Freemasonry by his friend Roy Rogers, who was a member of Hollywood Lodge No. 355. What did you think of this story? Hear more stories like this by subscribing to the Old-Fashioned Masonic Podcast. Disclaimer: the views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Old-Fashioned Masonic Podcast, any Grand Lodge or Shrine Center, and we encourage viewers to conduct their research and form their conclusions based on reliable sources and personal beliefs.